Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very, very much for being here. My name is David Griffith. I'm the Director of Programs and Outreach for the LGBT Elder Initiative. And we are very happy to be able to put on this presentation for you all this afternoon. But again, thank you for being here on a somewhat dreary afternoon to talk about some very important topics, but ones that are not always the most fun to be thinking about. But part of what we want to do with you all today is to be able to get people in the space to start thinking about some of these tough issues, gain more information, and have a chance to ask some questions to the professionals who we have here to speak as part of this program. We're calling this Empowered at the End of Life, having your voice when it really counts. Really, again, trying to emphasize the fact that thinking about these issues hopefully can be somewhat empowering. And the more knowledge and information that you have to start thinking about what you want at the end of your life, the easier that process will be when it comes. So with that said, I'm going to bring up Mark Peterson, who is a psychologist, an instructor, an author, who's written a book on the topic of end-of-life planning and preparation, and teaches a class at Temple Ollie, the Lifelong Learning Institute, on this topic, and came very highly recommended from some of the members of our planning committee as we were putting together today's program. And so I'll let him give a little more information on who he is and his background and how he came to have a passion for these subjects. And so please welcome Mark Peterson.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Don Friedman, for extending the invitation for me to come and share some of my thoughts with you. And I'm going to try to stick to 40 minutes for my presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about this. When I was about, God, I don't know how long, 55 years ago, I completed a dissertation which was on the relationship between emotions and cognition, how feelings affect our decision-making and thinking was what I was really curious about. And in fact, I spent most of my career counseling people about how to make tough decisions and also training counselors to do the same thing. So I have a very, very long and very passionate interest in this particular topic, which goes way, way back for me. And I rediscovered this when I became aware of the fact that end of life brings with it enormously complicated and scary issues for all of us. And because of that, we can freeze up or we can make bad decisions. I'm going to try to show you a little bit of this today. I'm going to show you 3 very short videos which have a lot of information in them, a lot of emotional information about what goes on. And I'm going to I've created, as you will see in your booklet, a set of references. Those references contain a hyperlink to the exact same videos, so if you want to watch them again, you can. It, of course, requires having a computer or a tablet and access to the internet. All of the references that I have a hyperlink to them, so you can connect with them, with the exception of one, which is a very short documentary on Netflix called Extremis, which I would strongly recommend that you watch. It's about what it's like when choices haven't been made and how difficult it is to make those choices. It's very sad. The first time I watched it, I was transfixed. The second and third times I watched it, I wept because it was so powerful. The woman who was featured in this is a physician in Oakland, California, and she's done a masterful job writing a book called Extreme Measures, which is about end of life and doing things that may be too extreme. Before we start, though, I'd like to ask this. How many people in here have completed advanced medical directives? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a pretty good percentage of this population, because on the average, only 20 to 30% of people have completed advanced medical directives. It's pretty remarkable when you see the statistic that people who people say that they want to die at home. And 80% of people say they want to die at home, 20% do. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, but part of the reason is they've never told anybody what they want. Another part of the reason is sometimes they're so sick that they can't be kept comfortable at home. We'll get into just a touch of that. I also have to say that I know this is going to be a frustrating presentation for me, because I normally spend 14 to 16 hours teaching people about this, and we're going to do about 30 minutes. So, the other thing that I should also say about advanced medical directives is that there's plenty of evidence that even though people have said, let's say, I want this or I want that, they get into the hospital and that's not what happens to them. They get treated for things they don't want to get treated for. The most classic one is people having what's called a do not resuscitate order. And hospitals are trained to resuscitate. They're not trained to not resuscitate. And I can give you a very brief example of that. We have a dear friend, a woman who's a retired ICU nurse. Her father was 93 and in the hospital. He had a DNR. He just had a fall and hit his head, and he arrested. He stopped breathing. And he was hooked up to machines, and the bells went off and everything. And all the staff came running with the crash cart, and they were going to resuscitate him. And our friend Jenny stood at the door and she said, "Not here, you're not coming in here." And they were taken aback by it. And so he passed. The next day she gets a call from and actually her language was quite a bit stronger than "not here." It's like, "Stay the F out of here." And the next day, the hospital called and they said, "We want to do an autopsy." And she said, "What do you want to do an autopsy for?" And they said, "Well, we want to know why he died." She said, "He was 93, no." But this kind of expresses just a little bit about what the medical system is about and some of the ways that they have templates for operation, which aren't always the greatest. Before I move any further into this, I just want to touch base with regard to, I want to move on to the next slide. The book, which I have a flyer for, this is a book I wrote published in late 2016. It is not a printed book. It's a book you read on a computer or a tablet. It's a different book from most because it has 65 links to videos, podcasts, newscasts, and articles. And so as you're reading along, you'll see bright blue ink. You tap on it and it's going to take you to a video. The 3 videos you're going to see are from the book, are also in the book. And so the book contains 6 chapters, and I'm not trying to do a big commercial for the book, but the chapters that it includes are how to select a proxy. It includes one on how to select the proper forms that you want to use, the implications of your choices, which is probably the biggest flaw that I see in the whole system at this point. If you make a choice for a particular kind of treatment, there are implications associated with that choice. And sometimes those implications may bring on more suffering. In fact, there's a lot of articles being written now about how prolonging life may be prolonging suffering rather than reducing it. So I have 2 chapters on that. I have a chapter on dementia, which I wish I could cover because dementia is a terribly critical thing nowadays. And the last is on death with dignity, namely people who want to choose to let their life end. And then there's an appendix which has forms that you can use. You can download and print and complete. But again, you have to have a computer attached to a printer if you want to download and print, and you have to have a computer to watch all of the different videos and listen to the podcasts and so on. If you don't have that, you could print the whole document out and read it, but you wouldn't be able to benefit from those hyperlinks. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that, and let's see, we're going to move to the next one. This is a video, and this video, let me see, this is a Kiernan video, okay. That's not the right video. There it is. Now this Stephen Kiernan, before you start this, Stephen Kiernan is an author. He wrote a book that was published in 2006 called Rescuing End of Life from the Medical Profession. And it's a very powerful video, and what he's going to show you, I want you to watch closely. He's talking about why people don't choose hospice.
Maybe more people don't go to hospice because it's easier to resist looking at the don't know. Especially when there's so much noise and clutter and distraction. No, what you need is another surgery. I'm in charge here and I say you need chemo. In my experience, radiation is the right answer for your thing. You know, we have this new medicine. Maybe you need to try shark's venom. We're doing stem cell stuff now. You know, a little gene therapy to take care of you. I mean, you just hear all this stuff and it's like, okay, if you can make the don't know 5 years away instead of 5 months away, okay. I'm terrified. You're the expert. I'm only going to do this once. You've seen it a lot of times. Help me do it well. Human nature, in other words. And there's no cure for human nature. Nor should there be, for the most part. And yet, now, we do see it coming. Oh, a guy who was a former next-door neighbor of mine is about 4 months past a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So what's he got? 4 months more? 6? He doesn't have a year, right? For pancreatic, he doesn't have a year. Now that we know that, a little bit of the don't know is gone away. Brad knows. So even though I fully accept that I'm going to go, I'd love it if I had a little time to plan. I don't need years, you know, but I think a little time would be great. There'll be fences that I'll want to mend because I'm human. I make mistakes like anybody. There'll be people I want to connect with. There'll be conversations I want to have with my sons. So then you do have something to give you energy and to make you think about the don't knows and how you want to get from here to there.
Okay, what did you see there? Anyone want to just... John?
The medical profession can try to convince people to continue against all odds.
Medical profession continue against all odds, right. All right, well, let me tell you 3 things that I see in this that I think are really powerful. The first is in the beginning section, he says maybe people don't go to hospice, and then he comes up with maybe we should try shark's venom, maybe a little stem cell, maybe this, maybe that, maybe radiation, maybe chemo. And what they're basically, what people are saying is, I am scared to death of dying. Make it go away. And he says, if you can make this 5 years from now so I don't have to face it, do it. So what we're seeing here is when you're confronted with a very scary thing, the first choice you're going to make is to panic and look for someone to help you out. And remember, he says right in the middle of it, he says, you're the doctor, you do this all the time, I'm only doing this once. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. So we turn ourselves into people who are totally dependent and totally connected, totally placing our trust in a doctor. I'm not saying you shouldn't place your trust in physicians, but you also need to be aware that, was anybody in here that's not going to die? The death rate still remains at 100% from what I understand. It's really important for you to understand that this is a response you can have. You become dependent and you ask for someone to take care of you. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to know the limits of that. So then he crosses over and he says, but wait a minute, if you get a terminal diagnosis, like he referred to his friend with pancreatic cancer, what the person can do then with hospice is make a graceful ending, can say goodbye, take care of business with people, make a much more profound and comfortable ending. So that's really important to understand, that you can do that. And the implication, the opposite is for making bad choices. And I'll give you one example. My son's husband had a mother who went into the hospital for an operation. She developed an infection post-operatively after she left and had to go back in. Her kidneys failed and she was going to die. And Daryl had negotiated with her what was to happen, but he hadn't completed the paperwork. Listen to this, he hadn't completed the paperwork. And Daryl's siblings came in and said, oh no, we want you to do everything. And do everything can be an absolutely disastrous way to respond to this, because doing everything in her case meant that the thing they needed to do was to keep her blood pressure up because her kidneys weren't working. So my son Craig said he counted 18 IVs going into her, giving her fluids to keep her blood pressure up. She gained about 75 pounds in just a few days. They literally were afraid she was going to leak from all this fluid in her that couldn't be removed because her kidneys were failing. After Daryl's siblings said, oh no, do everything, they never came back to the hospital. And so Daryl and Craig went to the ethics committee of the hospital and pleaded to have the treatment suspended, and in fact they agreed to it, and she died within 5 minutes of the removal of all of the machines that were on her. And the thing that was, to me, the most beautiful thing was that Daryl and Craig's friends, gay friends, were there with them, which was beautiful. It was really beautiful. So doing everything is an extremely important thing to consider whether you want to have done. Now, if you're a young person, maybe you want more done, you know, and maybe you should have more done to see what can happen. But that's a really important feature. So basically, what do you have to do if you're going to manage this thing and be in charge, empower yourself? Is you have to accomplish several tasks. First of all, you have to obtain some forms that you feel comfortable completing that just direct people as to what you want. You have to think and reflect on what you want, which is very important to do. You have to complete the forms, including a form that designates legally who is the medical proxy or healthcare agent. Those are interchangeable terms. And the medical proxy form is a very simple form. It's the designation form is just 2 pages, and it's very easy to fill that out and complete it. But when you choose someone who is going to be your healthcare agent or proxy, you need to have a backup. Because, like my wife and I, if we're both in an accident, who's going to make choices for us if we're both unconscious? So it's really important. Or if you're out of town, if I'm out of town and something happens to her, who's going to make choices? So it's very, very important that you get this one straight. And the last thing that you have to do in that is to have conversations. Now, I'm going to just take a very quick diversion into this. Having the conversation is a term of art that comes from caring for patients in the hospital and when the patient is very, very ill, maybe terminally ill, which they now call advanced illness. And so the story is, the typical story is, a doctor is really concerned about a patient who's very ill. He goes out and he has a consultation with another doctor who then says to him, well, have you had the conversation? And you can kind of look at that in neon light, have the conversation. Because what they're asking is, well, have you talked to the doctor about the possibility that your dad is going to die? And so having the conversation is an extremely critical thing, and in fact, it's a very difficult thing to do. Look at Stephen Kiernan, the one we just saw, saying, never mind all that stuff, just get me some shark's venom, and I'll get better. So having the conversation is a very, very critical aspect to it, and it's probably one of the most infrequently done. There's a study done where they asked doctors if it was important to, if it was important for a person who, losing my train of thought, that's my age, it's a brain cramp. So having the conversation is, I've lost it. I'll find it again. I'll just go on, it'll come back. Having the conversation, yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next stage of this, which involves something that is in each of your folders. There are two tools in your folder, and I'd like to ask you to take those out now. Now there's 2 in there. One is tool 1, which has a little sort of a light gray L-shaped place upside down. We're going to put that aside. I want you to go to tool 2 first. And tool 2, I believe, says something, some things are worse than death. Right? All right, I want you to take a look at that. Just quickly peruse it. And pick out one that's really easy for you to say, I definitely want this, or I definitely don't want this. And you don't have to respond. I'm going to ask if anybody would like to share what their thoughts are with that. Okay, let's just very quickly, this is just a once through, but you really should take this home with you and work on this. Anyone want to share a thought about something that they found was really easy for them to say yes or no to? Yes?
Well, the wheelchair one, said yes.
A wheelchair, you'd say yes. Okay. Mike?
Are in severe untreatable pain most of the time.
And what do you say? Ended at that point. Okay. Another one? Anyone else want to share one that they really resonated with? Yes.
No longer can recognize or interact with family or friends.
Okay, and what would your choice be?
Don't want treatment.
Don't want treatment. Okay. All right, so you see, we're going to have different choices. Obviously, there are no rights and wrongs to this. This is simply what your preferences are. And I would encourage you to take this. The interesting thing is, this was designed by the American Bar Association, Commission on Law and Aging. And to me, the weird thing is that the American Bar Association has withdrawn this particular question from the set of tools. And I haven't been able to find out why. It's only happened within the last year. Do you know why?
I don't absolutely know, but I would venture a guess that because it just says treatment, I mean, the treatment covers a host of different things.
Okay.
And so that some of someone's answer, yes or no, may be different depending on the actual treatment you're
Right.
talking about.
Okay.
And just a guess.
Okay, that could be. All right, so I just wanted you to get a sense of that. Was looking at that a little uncomfortable, seeing some of it? Yeah, it is uncomfortable. Just like Kiernan demonstrates, it's uncomfortable when he gets a diagnosis that he doesn't want. The second, the tool one, is one that I urge you to take a look at in terms of who would be the best person for you. And there are certain people that you cannot, according to the American Bar Association, use as the person to make choices for you. And those are, for example, your doctor cannot be your proxy. Nursing home personnel cannot be your proxy. Part of the reason is there's a potential conflict of interest. If the nursing home is given that, they may choose to keep you alive, choose to treat you because you're paying for the bed every night. So you need to be aware of that and think about that. There's a second thing that's really important in this process, and it has to do with the fact that not everybody can do this. Not everybody's competent and capable. And so I'm going to read you something that was written to me, sent to me. And then I want to be sure to talk to you a little bit about what if you don't know anybody that you feel comfortable asking to do this. So this is an article. This woman wrote to me that this January I supported my cousin in her making some tough decisions regarding her mother, my aunt. I made no decisions as they were my cousin's decisions to make, but I did everything I could think of to support the tough decisions she made. When my aunt's cardiologist, the specialist in whom my cousin had full trust, discovered that my aunt had transitioned to palliative care, he was very upset. My cousin was not at the hospital at this point, and I followed the cardiologist out to the hallway and told him that if he did not agree, it was important to speak up as my cousin put all her trust in him. On the contrary, he said that the correct decision had been made, and it was just difficult for him to accept it as he liked my aunt who had seen him for years. He followed up with a supportive call to my cousin, who was totally comfortable with the decision after hearing from him. I share this not to toot my own horn. The experience just told me that to get other supportive folks on board when tough decisions come my way. So here was a situation where offspring of her mom was really, really struggling with making a decision to terminate life-extending care and instead to provide comfort care. And Karen's going to talk more about comfort care in a few minutes. But this is an example. These are tough decisions, and I've already had a conversation with one person in here who is in the position of having to make choices, and they're very, very hard and very demanding. So I wanted to just emphasize that. Now, coming back to the one last thing that I want to mention is some of you may not have family, you may not have folks that you feel comfortable with, and you need to have someone who can be on duty for you if need be. And there is a group, and it's mentioned in the references I have, called Intervention Associates. They charge a fee, but they also take care of negotiating with the insurance companies for you. They will also become your healthcare advocate and take on the role that is required by that in terms of making decisions. Now, part of the problem with this is, and if you have family and the family disagrees internally within themselves as to what's the best course of treatment for you, then you can get caught in a I want this done, or no, don't do any more, and it can become a Donnybrook. I've heard of stories of coffee fonts being thrown across hospital rooms between siblings. It can be a very, very unpleasant experience. So you need someone who's strong, and if you become a proxy for another person, you have to be ready to take on those conflicts and resolve them. But you make the choice. And that's because you've completed the form that says that you are legally bound to make choices as requested by the person you're providing that care for. Okay? Any questions about that? Are some of you wondering who might be good for you as a proxy?
I just have a quick question. When we go and fill out those forms, if we were ourselves at home, is it a good thing to have it notarized? I mean, how do you prove
You don't have to have it notarized. The form, it's better if it's notarized. It gives more weight to it. If you have witnesses, a couple of witnesses, that always helps. But the forms are pretty basic, and actually you don't need to go to a lawyer to get the form that designates John Jones as your proxy. After that, then you have to basically say, all right, I've designated John Jones my proxy, and these are my choices. And in one sense, Tool 2 gives you a kind of a glimpse at those choices. But there are better forms than that, and there are forms that I am not at all comfortable with that I think are inadequate. Most of them are inadequate for the following reason. They don't tell you what the implications of your choices are. And let me give you one example of that. You all heard what CPR is? Okay. How many people do you think recover from CPR if it's administered in the hospital?
10%?
10%. Any others?
40%.
40%. Okay.
Close, 8%.
8%. Don's very close. Rudy took my class. He just got an A on the quiz. They did a study where they looked at ER, 911, Chicago Med, and all of those. And in 73 to 75% of the cases, people who had CPR recovered. Okay? And based on a study of 65,000 patients in Japan, the actual number that recovered fully was 3%. 4% recovered with mild to moderate brain damage, never to recover from it. Because one of the things you need to know is more than 4.5 minutes without oxygen and brain cells begin to die. So some of you may have heard of the Karen Ann Quinlan case. She was out for about 15, I believe. Terry Schiavo is another case. And in both those cases, their brains were pretty dysfunctional because of that. So when you say, yeah, I want CPR, and what do we know about CPR with older adults? A lot of broken ribs, punctured lungs, so on. If you're over 80, the actual recovery rate is probably lower than 3%, full recovery rate. So when you look at a form, it doesn't tell you that. That's what bothers me. It doesn't tell you those things. So, all right, so I want to show you a second video now. And this one is by the same people that did the first one. It's a part of a film for, and we're not quite ready, Andrew, but let me just finish the intro to this. Consider the Conversation is all about having the conversation. And the two producers, one of them is Terry Kuldasal and the other is Mike Bernhagen. And I talked with Terry and I asked him how he got started doing this. And he said, I was driving to school one day. He's an elementary school teacher. And my brother called me. And my brother said to me, he had cancer. And my brother said to me, the doctor told me that there wasn't anything more he could do for me and told me to go to hospice. And his brother said, what's hospice? So the doctor had really not told him anything about what hospice was about and how it could be helpful and so on. And so at any rate, that's the genesis of Terry Kuldasal wanting to produce this film. And it's an example of the communication or the lack of having the conversation. So we're going to watch this. The very first person that talks is Sherwin Newland, who's died. He was 82 or 83, a professor of history of medicine and surgery at Yale. And he wrote a book called How We Die in the 90s, which was a bestseller. So let's watch this.
The system is broken from the first day of pre-medical courses at college until the last day of a patient's life.
That if you're going to be hospitalized in our facility, you bring someone with you who can serve as your sort of ombudsman, your protectorate, because we can't help it, but we're likely to hurt you.
And I think of this as another unintended consequence of the technology.
And I can't tell you how many times on rounds I look at my residents and I go, how many of you would trade places with that patient? And not a hand goes up. And it's time after time after time. And then I go, then what the hell are we doing here?
What's hard about that sometimes is when you do try to have these conversations and do it in the best way that you know how and the most tactful way that you know how and be very open and not in any way threatening or confrontational, but to have people get very, very angry with you. You know, how dare you imply that my mom's not going to get through this?
One of the unintended consequences of the technology is that we don't know when to quit.
And if we don't find a way to change the conversation and to change, to some degree, our focus, we'll continue getting more of the same.
And I think that is the answer that anyone who is ill must employ, must say, hey doc, I am your patient.
And we've got ourselves in a real bind because we don't have the patient being honest about what they want and we don't have the physician being honest about what they think they should do. So somewhere along the way, an initiative like this is going to be like a breath of fresh air. It's going to be like a big beam of bright sunshine that says, let's confront these issues and let's be honest about how we're going to deal with them.
It's a huge window of opportunity for us, and we need to drive a Mack truck through it.
And the movements that have truly changed our society always come out of a groundswell of popular opinion.
So what'd you think of that?
What year was that done?
Consider the Conversation, I think, was produced about 2013, 14, something.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still taking that long for people in the medical field, as well as us, to have what he says should happen.
That's right, and it will continue. And there's some reasons for that. No one likes that conversation. It's a very unpleasant conversation, particularly if you're not trained to do it. It's a very, and you saw, among the things you saw in there was this woman saying, you try to be as tactful as you can and get attacked with, how dare you say that my dad isn't going to get through this? So we have a lot of examples of that, and it's, the conversation is a very difficult thing to have. There are, I can't tell you how many stories, but one that I've heard oftentimes is that oncologists, when all cancer treatments have failed, oftentimes will just stop showing up to see the patient. And the patient's saying, where's Dr. Smith? I've been with him for 8 years. Well, he's not there because he feels defeated and depressed and disappointed and embarrassed and so on. So, you know, it's not easy to have the conversation. So, other reactions to the film?
Yeah, I'm hearing two different scenarios. One is the fact that if I have a cancer diagnosis or terminal ill diagnosis, then I do have some preparation in some say, as opposed to me getting in a car accident or being hit by a bus and someone comes.
That's right.
My question is where do we decide, having a diagnosis that might be terminal, where to draw the line behind the fact that you have, with breast cancer, with prostate cancer, you have constant trial studies and innovations being made in those areas.
That's right.
We want to live. That's well, most of us want to live. Let me put it that way. You might have other issues going on mentally because of your illness that would kind of sway that opinion. But we're going to the hospital, we're getting these treatments because we want to live, we want to get better. So, because I'm 70, do I say, well, I done lived my life, I might as well turn in the towel now? Or do I continue?
You've articulated the precise question that every human being has. When is enough? How much do I want to try? How much suffering am I worth? That tool, too, is all about how much treatment you want and whether and how strongly you want that. There's no easy answers to this, but you can be prepared to know that there are tough questions ahead, and you can think a little bit about what you want to do. And that's what I've tried to put in the book, is that kind of question. John?
I just want to add that I think it gets to a point from a physician's point of view, I think every patient has the right to ask their physician what lies ahead. And this is part of what's going on in terms of trying to train people. To be honest with patients and telling, I mean, you know, years ago, we were taught never to tell a patient that they have a certain amount of time to live. And that's totally changing now. It's moving into really giving people an honest evaluation of how much time is left, which is one thing. But the other thing is what to expect. Will there be suffering if I take this treatment?
Right.
What will it really do? And I think you have the right as a patient to ask the doctor about that. And they have an obligation to tell you. I mean, it's sometimes not very pleasant. But the reason for doing that is that you can plan to make sure that decision once you know.
That's right. But a lot of times we're not given all of that information. In fact, there's a very well-known, I'll be right with you, bioethicist from Philadelphia who wrote several years ago that he thought it was okay to lie to patients to give them hope. And I have other bioethicists who vehemently disagree with that. Yes, we had two questions over here.
Well, I just wanted to say, when you're asking a physician or someone who doesn't know you, that you haven't corrected, you're getting their opinion on end of life.
You getting what?
Their opinion.
That's correct.
On end of life. So you ask a physician, and a physician would do anything and everything, then that's the information that you're going to get. That doesn't make them right or wrong. Again, it's about you choosing and looking at those questions.
Right. And if you happen to be the proxy for someone else, then you're doing that decision by proxy for that person. You can see how powerful and how anxiety provoking that can be. Yes, you had a question.
So the film did not show me, so it might have been speaking universally. But I'm just curious as to how much of this conversation, from the one that initiates it to the one that receives it, how much of it is driven by or framed by cultural beliefs as well as spiritual beliefs, so that the end result can be what we're hearing has to be processed as to who you are and from what point you got to that place.
That's a great question. I know that the conversation is influenced heavily by spiritual issues. And in fact, if you watch that extremist thing, you'll see brothers debating with each other about whether to continue treatment for their sister. But the medical profession is obligated to provide you the treatments you request. So it's more an issue of what is most important to you that you want to have honored. Have I answered your question? Okay. Yes.
I want to piggyback on this question. Does it matter the hospital you go to, whether it's secularly affiliated or religiously affiliated, if they're going to implement your instructions?
It's possible, but it probably matters more who the doctor is you're talking to. If a doctor is really comfortable talking about end-of-life choices for you, then it's a very different story from a doctor who's really uncomfortable with that. They're going to run away from it.
Well, if he's affiliated with a religious hospital-based hospital.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's true.
To follow their procedures?
Yeah, particularly if you have, there's a really dramatic story about a woman who handed her dad, she was a nurse, and she handed her dad some morphine. He was 93, he'd said he wanted to die. He took the morphine from her and took it. And because he asked her to give it to him. It was not enough to kill him, but a hospice nurse showed up unexpectedly and accused him of attempting to kill her. It cost her $120,000 to defend herself, and it was thrown out of court. I believe that that hospice was a right-to-life hospice. So they were very active in trying to promote sustaining life at all costs. Don.
I just have a question specific to the LGBT community in terms of if you choose like a best friend or a partner to be your proxy and legally make that so.
Right.
Does that take precedence over family who may come in and...
Yes, if it's legally designated, it does. But you could have some people vigorously protesting it. But if you're the designated person legally, call a lawyer and tell them to deal with the family.
What do you mean by legally?
Huh?
What do you mean by legally?
The first, remember I said there are two documents that are really important. The first is who you designate as your first proxy, and then who you designate as your alternate if you do. The second is what you want, what your choices are. And so once your choices are there, then you as the proxy have to honor those choices.
Now, I may be stepping on Dr. Friedman's presentation, but there was some reference in the paperwork, and you referred to it and filmed it, palliative care versus hospice care, and how that may impact on these conversations that we're talking about. Is that something you can address or someone else will?
I'm going to ask Karen to do that at the end of mine.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's very important. Yes, do you want to say something though now?
I did want to say something to your question about what he meant by legally designated. There is an entity called a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And if you want to designate someone legally that is not family, I would strongly suggest that you have that document drawn up. It's called a durable power of attorney for healthcare. Now, unfortunately, that will require an attorney, but you can probably find, certainly the senior law office in Philadelphia can help anybody do it for a very low cost. But the reason and what that document will say is that if you are unable to make decisions about your health care, you are designating this person first, this person second to make those decisions for you. I've got a million stories as a practicing physician of being in the middle of these discussions where you have feuding family members and the neighbor who's been taking care of mom for years because the family was here and the family was there, and now mom can't speak. The neighbor is the one who knows her best, but then you've got family who are saying, oh, no, we have to this, we have to that. So if you really want to make good and sure that it's someone non-family, I would recommend that you get this document.
This, David has included this durable power of attorney for healthcare, which was drawn up by the Pennsylvania Bar Association. That's in your materials. It says page 11 at the top. It says Pennsylvania Advanced Healthcare Directive. So that's the anchor for being authorized. Can we go to the next slide, David? Okay, now, all right, so I want to just very briefly touch on how we respond when we're scared. And so our natural reactions to fear of mortality were demonstrated well by Stephen Kiernan, but the first one usually is, it's not happening. If anybody has had a diagnosis that was like cancer or something that was potentially a fatal diagnosis, how much do you remember about what the doctor said after they told you that diagnosis? I had a prostate cancer scare. I didn't remember a damn thing after he said, well, it could be this, but we're going to do a biopsy. And so that's just one example of how you can lock up. But the denial is a really, really important thing. This isn't happening. This isn't going to be me. And that's a very, very common, and we do it to protect ourselves. It's not a bad thing. It's not a curse word to engage in denial. The second thing is to fight. And the doctor's a quack. Doctor doesn't know what they're talking about. We're going to sue the doctor. And in fact, there was a case in New Jersey, a fellow named Jim Davis whose kidneys failed, like Daryl's mother that I mentioned earlier. And the daughter flew in from California and she said, Dad's a fighter. See the fight? Dad's a fighter. He would never allow the termination. Meanwhile, the hospital, the ethics committee, and everybody had said, discontinue treatment. There's no way this gentleman's going to survive. So she mobilized the family. So the whole family started to fight with the hospital, and they found a doctor that would support them continuing to care for him and give him treatment. And he lived for another 3 months at a cost of estimated about $240,000. never regained consciousness, and then died. So fight is a thing, and that's the do everything. In fact, there's an Eastern journal, I think it's the New England Journal of Medicine, describes one of the problems with end-of-life care as the daughter from California. And it's the person who swoops in and says, oh my God, you're doing this all wrong, you've got to get this right, Dad's going to live, Mom's going to live. The flight one I'm going to show you in just a minute. It's characterized by Daryl's siblings, who never came back after they said, do everything for Mom. Never came back to the hospital to see her again. And dependency, Stephen Kiernan says, you're the doctor, you do this all the time, tell me what to do, I only doing this once. So these are very common responses, and if you can keep these in mind for yourself, or if you're partly for someone else, to help you sort of manage your emotions and make effective choices, it's really worth it. I'm going to show you one more short video. And this is out of a Frontline documentary based on Gawandhi's book, Being Mortal. And so just have a look at this.
When serious illnesses take us to hospitals, we look to doctors for answers. But what happens when there are no more cures?
Do you want to call her daughter?
Zara Cooper is an emergency surgeon with palliative care training at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. She frequently must deal with patients surprised that they're nearing the end of life.
It's certain that everybody's going to die. There's no certainty as to when.
It's not clear from the CT scan what's going on.
And frequently, as an emergency surgeon, I'm meeting somebody for the first time and they have no idea that they could die from their disease. Whether that's because nobody's told them or they're in denial, I don't know, but it's always a surprise.
Clyde Earle has been undergoing treatment for advanced cancer for a year. He's now suffering with intense pain. The prognosis is not good.
Well, you're in good hands here, Dr. Cooper.
I know.
Dr. Cooper wants to talk to Mr. Earle and his wife, Audrey, about what comes next.
The rumor has it you guys are newlyweds. Is that right? Huh?
Yeah.
That's great.
In March.
Now, what happened before you came into the hospital?
One morning, I had so much pain, I could not take it. I was in deep trouble.
Yeah.
3:30
with pain.
Yeah. What I discovered was that he and his wife had the expectation that he had many more months. So let me ask you, what do we expect to happen after you leave the hospital?
We're going fishing.
Okay.
We're going up to a house in Maine.
Okay.
Okay. And then after Maine, we'll go back to the house in Florida.
Right.
Now, has anybody talked to you about hospice or having hospice nurses take care of you, or is that part of the plan?
Women, if we need it.
Right.
I know the procedure.
Yeah. When I said hospice, it was as if I was talking to somebody who only thought that hospice would be necessary when he was just about to die. My impression was that that was the goal, was to get him to hospice. My primary concern I think the lesson learned is that you have to ask. You can't make those assumptions because oftentimes patients and their families aren't at all where you think they are and aren't at all where you think they should be.
But Zara Cooper had at least started a conversation about the end of life.
We are here to take care of you, okay? All right.
As Clyde Earle's condition worsens, Dr. Cooper brought in Kathy Selvaggi, a senior palliative care physician whose expertise is in end-of-life care. She would now take up the hospice discussion.
She and I had a conversation about goals of care and
when Dr. Selvaggi came down to the ICU to meet them, I said, you've got a lot of work to do. She said, I know.
that it was really important to take his wife aside and talk about what I was seeing.
Hi.
How are you, Audrey?
Let's not ask a question like that.
I know. Clyde? Good morning.
It's been like this
I don't like it. I know you don't. I don't like it at all. It is a process. And I think, it is very hard to come to the realization that you're dying. These are really important conversations that should not be waiting the last week of someone's life. I'm not sure I'm going to get him back to Maine.
We're not. Let's face the truth.
I don't think we are.
No.
I think he's going to be here with us.
Yeah, I know he is. I guess I was in my own world. Figuring everything could be fixed. In my heart, though, I knew better. I knew what was ahead. He didn't. And I didn't share it with him.
It's those moments when people show that they want to talk about it. Once somebody gives you that kind of opening, in palliative care, we're trained to take that opening and to identify that as a moment where you can help somebody. Whereas I think the natural inclination is to say, we're going to get him better, you're going to get him home, because it makes you feel better.
Oh, I love you. Oh, I love you, honey.
Okay. Thank you. So that's pretty powerful, isn't it? Yes?
Had no one told them that he was terminal? Near terminal?
Either they had told him and he hadn't heard it, or they hadn't told him. In this particular case, his wife says, I knew what was coming, but I didn't share it with him. So, I mean, she was part of the collusion not to deal with this because it was too painful for her. It's very difficult. And the unfortunate thing is, in a situation like this man never got the benefits of hospice, which Karen's going to talk about a lot more. Hospice extends life by 25% over people who don't go through hospice.
Is that compared to a hospital?
Yes. Well, if hospitals don't do hospice care, I think that hospice is, unless a person can't be cared for outside it. But there's a whole series of very interesting comments that are made in this. The first one was when she says, the Czar Cooper says, what are you going to do after you leave here? And she says, we're going to go to Maine fishing, and then we're going to go to Florida to our house there, which is, I mean, looking at the man in the bed, you're pretty sure that's not going to happen. And then she says, what about hospice? And she basically says, when and if we need it, but what she's saying is, I don't want to go there. I'm not going to do that. And so you're getting this pushback already, in the denial, which I showed you those 4 things. There's denial and flight going on big time there. So yes, I saw a hand.
Experience about 5 years ago with a nursing home, Sunrise in Louisville, where the director of the facility was pushing for the signed paper saying do not take extraordinary measures because by having that paper, he could bring in outside help, which would be paid for by Medicare, and take some of the workload of his and make it in-house employees.
That's right.
I think that was right.
Well, hospice does pays $155 a day and provides a lot of services. They don't provide full-time nursing care, but they will provide nurse visits and emergency nurse consultations and palliative care and the medicines to keep you comfortable. So there's a lot of things it does, but I'm glad to hear that they're encouraging it. Time, I just got the time sign. So, well, actually, I'm just about done, and I want to just show you this last concluding slide. Yeah, go for it. No, that's not it. It's the one before it. There, that one. So, you can have your voice honored, but it takes preparation and it takes some really careful reflection and really solid conversations with your family, your doctor, your proxy, and probably with your lawyer too. Because your lawyer can help out if you get stuck in someone wanting to treat you when you don't need it or you don't want it. So I'm going to close with that, and then I'm going to let my colleague finish up with her thoughts on this.
All right, so thank you again to Mark Peterson for that. And Mark is going to stick around, and I forgot to say this at the beginning, but at the end we're going to do some Q&A with both Mark and with Karen. So if there are questions you still have for Mark, there will be another opportunity to ask those. There are also, on each of the tables, are some note cards and pens. So if you have a question that you're more comfortable writing down and then having someone else read out during the Q&A at the end, there is that option also. So moving along with the program, we're going to have Dr. Karen Nichols speak next. Karen is with AmeriHealth Caritas. He also has a long career as a primary care physician, and he's going to continue the conversation on hospice and palliative care, and some of what she sees as the priorities being for folks here to know about end-of-life care and end-of-life planning. So please welcome Dr. Karen Nichols.
Good afternoon. I'm almost afraid to say, yeah, I'm a doctor. We're not all bad. We're not all bad. I just want to start with just a couple of comments back to some of the things that Mark had talked about, mainly about the conversation. It's one of those, it's not a single conversation. It's never ever turns out to be a single conversation, especially if it's broached by a medical professional, because I may be seeing that somebody is approaching a point where all of the miraculous things that medical science can do isn't necessarily going to help in the long run. That it's really, I used to describe it when I was teaching medical students, is that we sometimes get to a point where instead of helping people, we're actually harming them. We're actually doing more to someone than we're actually doing for someone. And whenever I was in a situation where I got to that point with a patient of mine, I had no problem broaching the conversation. But it's never a single conversation. It's something that goes on. And the other thing I want to say is that even once you've had your conversations with everyone that you need to have them with, you've made your decisions, you've written it all down, you've gotten your proxy signed up, you got your durable POA, everything is great, you can always change your mind. It's not like it's sealed in stone and you can never rethink, because things change. And I would just like to encourage everyone who's here to start thinking about it now, and the time really to make all these decisions is not when you're sick. It's not when you're in the hospital with your mom, your dad, your aunt, your brother, whoever who is really ill and is looking like Clyde looked in the bed. The time to make all of those decisions is when you're well, is when you're healthy, when it isn't so pressing that you make a decision by Tuesday because of whatever is going on. So what I'm actually supposed to talk about is palliative care and hospice. When I was a resident in the 80s, I guess the late 80s, when hospice was first really taking off and becoming, I don't want to say popular, but becoming universally available. And I can remember hearing about it and thinking to myself, this is the greatest thing in the world. What took people so long to figure this out? And the reason that was my thought process, when I was probably a couple of years earlier, I did a span of time with, I did an elective with an oncologist, a great oncologist. He was an excellent physician. He was caring, he was thoughtful, he was bright, and he wasn't bad looking either. You know, all of these things are good. And I vividly remember, like it was yesterday, seeing a patient with him. It was a woman who was probably in her late 50s, early 60s. She'd had metastatic breast cancer for a long period of time. She had just been hospitalized with a bout of pneumonia, and she was recovering from her second or third bout with pneumonia. And we went to visit her in the hospital one day. And so she's there, her husband is there, her adult daughter was there. And she said to Dr. Oyer, was the name of the oncologist, she says, you know, I know that I'm going to die soon. And I know you can't tell me when that's going to be. But what's it going to be like? Is it going to be painful? Do I just go to sleep and that's it? And what if I can't wait that long? She had various medications that she took to control her pain. And at one point, she had even asked him, you know, what if I take the whole bottle? You know, if I have a day, like a really bad day, can I just take the whole bottle and call it quits? So we had this intense conversation at 9 o'clock in the morning. And he's talking with her. Her husband looks like somebody just put a knife through his heart. Her daughter just has tears rolling down her face in the corner. I am trying to keep it together. This is the first time I ever met this woman, the first time I had ever been in this kind of a situation, and I just wanted to not become a blithering idiot. He was doing all the talking. It was, I'm gonna say, about 20 minutes that we spent at the bedside with this family, and we came out of the room. I'll never forget it. We went, in the hospital had stairwells that were outside. They were, you know, they were like outside. So we went out there and we stood on the stairwell, in the stairwell for a minute. And because he had to pull himself together too. I took a look at him and he just about was in tears. I could barely, and I said to him, I said, how often do you have conversations like this? And he says, well, I'm not gonna say I do it often. He says, but whenever the situation arises, I have to do that because that's part of my job. That's part of caring for the whole person. So we stood there for a little while and, you know, took a few deep breaths, wiped away a few tears, and we went on with our day. And I share that story to say that there are lots of people in the medical profession who will help you through this. We're not all just doing everything at all costs, especially now, especially because we can do so much. There have been so many advances. And what I always like to say is just because we can do something does not always mean we should do something. And that's where we take our cue from the patient. Someone had asked about where spirituality intersected with, you know, what someone's wishes are. Well, as a medical professional, I have to get that from you because I took an oath not to impose my spirituality or my values on you, but I will defend whatever yours are, whatever it is that you want to do. Now, there are some physicians that are uncomfortable with the idea of doing certain things or not doing certain things. And the other part of that oath and the other part of what physicians in general are vowed to do, that if you have a conversation with your patient and what the direction that your patient wants to go is not something that you personally can support because of your beliefs or your spirituality or whatever, then you have to turn that person over, their care over to someone else who can then guide them the way that they want to go. So, moving on. So then there was a question, what's the difference between palliative care and hospice? Palliative care is, the main difference, they both focus on comfort. They do absolutely everything to make sure the patient is comfortable. The main difference is that palliative care is something that you can have provided while you're getting treatment for whatever disease you have, whether it's cancer or congestive heart failure or lung disease or whatever it may be. Hospice is really relegated to approximately the last 6 to 8 months of your life, which when I first heard about that, I was like, okay, so you get 6 months. What happens if it's 6 months and 2 days and you're still here? What do we do then? What do we do then? It can continue. There are certain assessments that are done, and provided you're still kind of on that trajectory, it can certainly continue. Now, I've had patients that have outlived their hospice. I've had this one little lady, she had aortic stenosis, and she had her valve replaced, but she had a myriad of other problems as well, diabetes and lung disease and this, that, and the other thing, and did not do well after her surgery. And so between she and I and her cardiologist, we decided to put her on hospice. 2 years later, she was still there, hale and hearty, and actually did better getting the extra services that she got from hospice. She had an aide that would come in and kind of tidy up and do her dishes and help her with her laundry that she could send to go food shopping. She had a nurse that would come in and make sure that she was taking what few medicines she agreed to take, which was fine. She would come in and make sure, if she was having problems with her shortness of breath, she would help her with this and blah, 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 blah. We gave her oxygen and various things. And 2 years later, she's still cool. She's still all right. She's still percolating along, which again is okay. It's fine. We at that point kind of had to take her off of hospice because we couldn't keep it going any longer. And I believe that she lived another 1.5 years or so before she finally went ahead and died. Lovely lady. I can still see her face. She's about this tall. So hospice is relegated to the very end. Palliative care can go along with whatever other treatment is going on. There are physicians who specialize in palliative care by itself. There are other physicians, there are oncologists and cardiologists and surgeons who specialize in palliative care as well, so that they can treat their patients who have a terminal illness, but they can do both. They can treat the illness as well as make sure that all of their symptoms are controlled. Let me just stop there. Questions?
Yes, sir.
Because one of the, I don't know, I think it's a misconception, when people hear palliative care, and even hospice, they just think of cancer.
Yes.
About other.
Hospice originated with the oncologists because years ago they realized, they did figure out that, they're giving them all these meds to try and kill the cancer, and it may or may not be doing anything at some certain point. And so it came out of the need for the understanding, I should say, that these patients still needed some kind of care, they just didn't need that kind of care. So people do still instinctively think about it being hospice, but the list of diagnoses that palliative care and hospice can be used for is long. It can be any kind of end-stage organ disease, so that could be congestive heart failure, end-stage lung disease, end-stage liver disease. It can be HIV. It can be renal disease. At a certain age, when your kidneys start to fail, dialysis does not necessarily help, because dialysis, let me talk about dialysis for a minute. It was designed for young people whose kidneys fail, and they probably don't have too much else wrong with them, because it's very draining on the body to undergo a dialysis treatment. It's 3 to 4 hours of your life, 3 days a week. You gotta usually go somewhere, kind of chill out in your recliner while the blood is coming out of your arm into this machine. It gets cleaned and they give you your own blood back. So you can imagine there's a big shift in minerals and shift in all of the nutrients and whatnot that's in your bloodstream when it goes through that process. So usually most people, when they're done with their dialysis, they're done for the day. They really are. And then there's a day in between that they might be okay, and then they get to do it all over again. So if you're elderly, if you have a number of different comorbidities, we call them, or additional diagnoses, in addition to the fact that your kidneys have failed, dialysis may not be the best choice. So there are people who, when they're told that their kidneys are failing, prefer not to go on dialysis. And that would be another situation where hospice and palliative care would be excellent, an excellent use. I saw another question. Yes, sir.
It's true thought that hospice care was in a facility, not necessarily in your home. But it sounds like you're saying that both of them could also be in your home.
Absolutely. Actually, hospice is designed to be in your home. It's the whole idea is that you are home, you are kept at home, and whatever treatment, whatever symptoms you may be having, they're controlled at your home. So they have people that come out to you at home. Now, that also means that you now they're not there 24 hours a day, and they're not there 7 days a week. So that means that while you're home, there needs to also be someone else in your home to kind of help you out. It's usually they can train and they can do a lot of teaching with a family member who will be there when the hospice nurse or the hospice aide or the social worker is not. It's in addition to whatever you can provide in your home. So now when it gets to the point, if you have symptoms that can't be controlled in your home, there are inpatient hospice units where they will bring you in to, think cross between a hospital and the Hilton, essentially, they're lovely places. The hospice, the inpatient units, they're comfortable. They have a place where you can come together as a family. They usually have kitchen units. People sometimes come and they cook. There was one that had like a little fireplace thing going. There's always a spot within your room for somebody to spend the night if your family member, caregiver, whoever wants to stay there with you. So yeah, they're beautiful. They are absolutely gorgeous and very, very comfortable. However, when they bring you in, it's usually for a short period of time because you need something more intensive that they can't handle in your home. For example, if you're having, say, intractable vomiting, no one's going to deal with that at home. So they can bring you in, they can give you a little bit of fluid, they can give you some medications to calm that down, make sure everything is stable, and then once that's over with, if you're well enough, you can then go ahead and go back home. There are some times that people, while they'll agree to hospice care for their loved one, but they don't like the idea of having dad die in the house. You know, he can be there, he can get his care there up until the very, very end, because we just don't like that idea, you know. And that's okay, because then those situations when the person is within 24 hours or so of going, they'll move them into the unit. So they could have stayed home however long, getting all of their care there. They're still in their familiar surroundings. Family, friends, whoever can come over can, but at that very last, very end, then they'll transport them into the unit and have them go ahead and go there, because sometimes people they're just kind of antsy about having somebody die in the house. Sometimes. Yes, sir.
Two questions. Will you be including in your discussion how one arranges care hospice?
Yes.
Secondly, you said that the nurse and social worker or whatever comes in for hospice care, some of they're part-time, the rest is up to another family member or whoever to take care of the person in the hospice. What if one doesn't have a family member who's there to take care of the hospice person is gone?
That is a problem. Oh, I'm sorry. So the first question was I going to go over how you get hospice in the first place and how you sign up for that, and I will do that a little closer to the end. But the second part was, what if you don't have someone living in the home with you, or you don't have a family or a family member or a caregiver who will be there with you when the hospice folks leave? If you are still able to kind of take care of yourself, then you can then you're there, you're kind of under your own devices. By take care of yourself, I mean can get yourself to the bathroom, can get yourself ready for bed. It's safe for you to be in your home by yourself. Then that the hospice folks can come in and out, and that's okay. For people who are beyond that and need either help getting to the bathroom, need help with getting dressed, getting bathed, that kind of thing, when they don't have anybody, a lot of times people will go into a nursing facility where the staff at the nursing home can then do all of those things that a caregiver in your house would do. They'll bring you your meals, help you get dressed, bathed, etc. Make sure that you're safe, make sure you're not falling, make sure you get your medications that you need. The hospice company will still send extra people in to see you in that setting, because in that situation, that nursing facility is your home for a short period of time. Does that?
So the only other alternative?
Unfortunately, right now, yeah, that is the only other alternative. That is the only other alternative.
Isn't there another one that you can hire a healthcare professional? I thought for Miami, what's running around the top?
If you have the funds to do that, sure. You can always hire private duty. It's costly, but it can be done. You're right, it can be done. You can hire someone to be there.
As an example, I know somebody who went into a hospice in the early 90s. He had HIV, and he went into some kind of residential hospice. I guess he didn't have anybody in his family to take care of him. And he's still alive and able to work. The new treatments came along in time to save his life. Going today.
Yeah, he outlived hospice. It happens. Yes.
Did I misinterpret something you said earlier when you were describing the difference between palliative and hospice? I understood you say palliative, you can have ongoing treatment for whatever the condition is that you're suffering from.
Okay.
But hospice, I got the impression that's not so much the case. It's more toward the end of life.
Correct. Well, usually when hospice benefits start, or when a person goes into hospice, it's with the knowledge and with the understanding that whatever their condition is, that further treatment is not necessarily going to help it. Therefore, it's usually foregone. Cancer is a perfect example. If you have a terminal cancer, once you say you've been having some palliative care along the way, when you get to the point where you and your doctor decide, you know what, the medications aren't helping, the chemo's not doing anything, the radiation's just making me sick, and it's not working on the cancer, then those treatments would stop, because logically there's no reason to continue.
Second part to the same question. Should then we consider in drafting the power of attorney, or whatever you call it, the outline of what you do and don't want, should those two things be considered and mentioned, palliative versus hospice?
You can, yes, you absolutely can. And that's one of the, I had looked at the, what was it? It's in your packet. What is it called? The sheet that says, are some conditions worse than death? And we talked about this a little bit. You know, there are certain, when you, as you look at that and as you think about that, you should think about what treatments are available. For example, you may say, if I'm no longer able to make my own decisions, if I'm not, you know, my brain is not such that I can kind of think and speak and talk and understand, you may not want to have a feeding tube. The flip side to that is that if you are awake and aware and have, say, esophageal cancer that they need to resect, they're going to have to kind of cut out part of your esophagus. You may, even and you're still awake and aware and you're still able to recognize and speak to people, you may want a feeding tube. So your decisions may be different depending on the situation that you're in. I mean, there are some people that have said flatly, outright, I don't particularly care whether I'm awake, alert, or whatever. If my heart stops, I don't want CPR. Period. End of conversation. And that's okay. On the other hand, I've had other people say, well, if you catch me in time and you think that I'm going to respond and I'm going to come back and I'll be able to think and talk to my family, then yeah, go ahead. I want you to do CPR.
Yeah, we're both smiling because we're placing upon ourselves a great onus of medical understanding at any given crisis time in our life.
Which is why I started off by saying the time to do this is when there is no crisis. When there is no crisis, because you're right. When you're Clyde, then you know it's. I don't want to say it's too late, but you have to make decisions. You have minutes, hours, maybe a day or two to make decisions. When you're fine, like today, you can take a couple of weeks. You can talk about it with people. You can think about it. You can even talk about it, and you should talk about it with your doctor and say, you know, I was at a talk, somebody was talking about palliative care and hospice and making advanced decisions and, you know, help me figure this out. Because you're right, there are certain medical things that you need know a little bit about to be able to make an informed decision and to be able to craft your desires in a way that makes sense. For example, there are some times when people go about to make these decisions, they say, well, I don't want the CPR. I don't want the chest compressions because I heard that can break ribs, but I want you to put me on the breathing machine. Okay, from a medical standpoint, that makes no sense. When your heart stops, the blood's not rolling around and it's not taking oxygen to any of your organs, and you're not breathing, so you're not bringing in oxygen that could then go to your organs. So if you don't do the compressions, which makes your heart pump the blood around, why are we giving you oxygen again? Because it's not going anywhere. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, this is years ago, I'm sure things have changed. My mom was part of hospice back in 1998, and she survived like 3 years, but the last 2 weeks of her life, hospice decided it would be a good idea to put my mother in the hospital because now she has a heart condition they can fix. No, they couldn't. But I wasn't the only caregiver. My dad was still alive. Mm-hmm. My dad opted, yeah, no.
He said, yeah, go ahead, take it.
But I got a hold of that. My dad's heart doctor was like, you got to get to the hospital. You come and save my mother because my dad is sort of agreed because she's not thinking. Mm-hmm. He just wants my mom.
Right.
That he sort of agreed to make them You know, but then, before he got there, another doctor came to take care for my mother, who convinced me, not my dad, and I had siblings older than me, but now they come to the only daughter in the house.
Always.
And convinced me that I was putting my mother through a horrible death if I didn't put her on a feeding tube. I agreed because I didn't know any better. I do now because of my partner did the same thing, and I said, no, it's a feeding tube because she's just going to go to sleep. But, and that's exactly what happened. But I didn't know any better. I agreed my mother for days after that. The guilt I dealt with for years over that is that I killed my mother and then my father was gave her heart surgery, but he saved her. And I'm the one that agreed to put the feeding tube in because at that point my father made the decision.
Make the decision.
And of course, like I said, my brothers were 10 years older than me.
My brothers are ladies. I have 4 of them. They're ladies. I'm sorry. It is what it is. It is what it is. Yeah. As the only daughter, anything, my mother, thank goodness right now is about 86 and doing well. But yeah, everything will fall to me, and you know, and they'll be calling me on the phone. Hey, you know, Mom didn't take the yellow pill. Okay. Did you give it to her anyway? Well, she's supposed to take it in the morning, and now it's 2 in the afternoon. Just give her the yellow pill. Just give her the yellow pill and get off my phone. But anyway, a lot of things have changed since the 90s with certainly with hospice and certainly with the perspective of a lot of physicians. Because, like I said, we realize that not everything we do turns out to be helpful. And the other thing I wanted to mention, you know, it's not easy for doctors either. You know, I mean, especially if it's somebody that we've taken care of for a long period of time, we get attached. You know, we try not to, but it's you know, we're human. Don't tell anybody I said that, but we are. And we get attached, and you know, we don't want to lose people either. But the reality is nobody gets out alive. It's just kind of the way life's been designed. And at the end, it's really one of the only times that you can really design and prescribe, for the most part, how you want to make your exit. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with several people who, when they found out they had a terminal illness, faced it with such grace and such dignity. It was somewhat amazing to me. I had one woman who had ovarian cancer, was stage 4 ovarian cancer by the time it was found. She was in her late 50s. And I would call her. She got to the point where she was home and couldn't come into the office, and I would call her periodically, and when I got off the phone with her, she was uplifting to me, talking to, you know, and I was calling just to check in, you know, are you okay? And she had hospice coming in, and I forget who was living with her to help take care of her. But you know, anytime I would call, I almost dreaded calling because I knew she was dwindling, she was dying. But she was so upbeat. I was like, wow, I hope that when I get there, I can do the same thing. Because it really can be a very empowering situation. You kind of know pretty much, you know, how much time you have, and you can orchestrate it however you want. You can bring in all the grandkids or you're not. You can, you know, I had a very good friend who died in the fall, and I took her for a ride in my convertible about a week and a half before she died. And she was like, oh, I always wanted to do this. I never got a ride in it. She had people taking pictures of her, you know, and it was a ride to the emergency room, but she got a ride in the convertible nonetheless. It was kind of cool, you know, you pull up to the ER with the top down and they're like, is somebody like coming here? But I say that to say, you know, you can do it however you want. You just have to plan ahead when you're well. Yes, sir.
Yes, Doctor, in the, I want to say last 5 to 7 years, we've seen this onslaught of home health care. We have someone come in. Is that considered palliative care? Then the other thing I wanted to say is, for those of us who have siblings, a mother can take care of 5 kids. 5 kids can't take care of one mother.
Nope.
It always falls on 1 or 2 siblings to be there. And I think it's good now that you do have outside help, even if they're training family members, because that gives that family member that's there, whether it's a lover, whether it's a brother or sister, it gives them some relief so they can breathe.
Exactly.
A lot of times when I was caring for my mother, if I went out hanging with a couple of friends, I'm like, is she okay? Then I'm all up in my head, so I'm still not happy.
And you can't enjoy yourself.
And that can go the same with a lover or anyone. So I think that does kind of open up another door where they don't necessarily have to go to hospice right away because they're not at end of life.
Correct. But you have some help in somebody to kind of keep, so that you can take care of yourself. I mean, you bring up a very, very good point that we haven't even talked about, and that's the caregivers. And we could spend a whole 2 hours talking about them. Exactly, because you know it is no joke being a caregiver. It's not an easy thing to do, and people have done studies and found that within 4 or 5 years of someone becoming a caregiver, the caregiver has a serious health event because you end up neglecting yourself because you're taking care of whoever it is that you're taking care of, and your whole focus is, you know, let me help them, let me do for them, but you really have to take care of yourself as well. Absolutely. Your question about home health, yes, the home health industry has blossomed. And there are a ton of different companies where you can hire someone, usually they're aides, that they can come in, but they can come in and they can't do nursing stuff. But they can be there while you go out and go shopping or go hang with your friends or something, so that there's someone with whoever is being cared for.
Statistically, if you're in your own home, you're more comfortable as opposed to going into a hospital. You're seeing people come in with white uniforms all the time.
Right.
All the time. It's like,
and besides all of that, a hospital is not generally a healthy place to be. It really isn't. And the older you get, the less good it is. That's really, I phrase that really badly, but the older you get, the less you want to be in the hospital, because it's really not, it's not, there are germs there are bacteria there that they can't fix, that they can't get rid of for a number of different reasons. There's the potential for, you know, any procedure that you have, there's a potential for it to go awry. So if you really, really don't have to be there, you don't want to be there. I know, your shoulder got tired, yes.
So, how do we slice this pie? From the medical perspective, and we're continually bombarded with the extension of our life path as far as AIDS goes. 1 year is 71, and that ticks off. Another time is 75. And so, with sickness being the opposite, in this room, are we all in a state of denial? Because at what point do we say, look, the time is up, it's coming, it's approaching. So why is there this panic setting about how we would exit the grand finale when we clearly know what to expect?
I think it's because you may know what to expect, but you don't know when it's coming. I mean, that unknown is still there. You don't know when. You don't, you know, maybe it's at 70, maybe it's at 80. People are living well into their hundreds these days, so maybe it's 102. So it's a little bit difficult to prepare for something when you don't know when it's coming. So does that mean you have a couple weeks to deal with it, or do you want to put it off for another 2 or 3 years? That's a personal decision. You know it's coming, but you don't know when it's going to be here.
So should the fear of the dark be the disease that's impending, the aging that comes with it? So all those crucibles allow you to do what in the downtime?
I would say the first thing is try not to approach it with fear, because you know it's going to be there. you know, and try and take the fear out, because it's the fear that tends to paralyze people and not help. It's not helpful. Fear is not necessarily helpful in this particular situation. And to try and approach it is more saying, okay, yeah, I know it's coming. Let me get my stuff in order. And if I need it in a year, I've got it. If I don't need it for 10 years, I still got it. Yes.
The idea of going into a nursing home because there's no family member there, it's kind of like a shared resort.
It's icky.
I thought that in the past there was also hospice facilities. I know hospice is usually in home, but I thought at one time there was also
Hospice facilities, yes. There are still hospice facilities. There are inpatient hospice facilities, but they don't have people there long term. So let's just say theoretically that, you know, you've got 4 months, 4 of the 6 months left of your life. They would not have you live in their facility for those 4 months because it's not set up for that. If you have some symptom that's going on that they can't really treat well while you're at home, they'll bring you into the inpatient facility, treat you there for a couple of days, maybe a week or so, with the idea that you would ultimately go back home. They're just not set up for someone to be in the facility long term. And we've talked about a couple of people who've been receiving hospice care for multiple years. They're really not set up for that. Yes.
I want to speak to the barriers that do exist within the seniors in our community. And what can we do as people in our community? Because some of the areas of barriers could exist within the religious organizations within our communities. So how could they make more of an impact when it comes to our seniors as far as addressing the needs, as far as dealing with the abuse, because some of our seniors have been abused, and the frauds and the scams in our communities? How can we avoid those pitfalls in our communities when it comes to health care and all the other bigger issues in our community?
And all those other bigger issues. That's a heck of a good question. And I'm not sure I have a really good answer. In terms of I mean, yes, there are a lot of scams, and unfortunately, the con artists tend to prey on older people because they figure, you know, you don't know what's going on, you're not really paying attention, or maybe you have a little dementia or whatever, and they can talk really fast and get you to sign, and off they go. In that, I would always say, you know, don't let anybody rush you into anything. If somebody is trying to talk you into something, you should always be able to say, you know, I need to think about this, or I want to have my fill in the blank make this decision with me. I need to talk to my partner or my sister or, you know, my good friend or whatever. And if they're not willing to wait for you to do that, it's probably a scam. I mean, because anything legitimate will give you time to really figure it out.
I just had another question, because I haven't dealt with personal loss since '03, but in '01, my father had a specific DNR, and because I had to call the rescue, because he wasn't in hospice, they
asked you to rescind it so that they could take him to the hospital.
Exactly, they did not honor it, put my dad on a tube, because my brother got to the hospital from Jersey to Philly for my dad, and I was like, see, I don't know what happened. I left because he was in the rescue squad. Where are they? Because we were like 5 minutes from the hospital.
Yeah.
And here they had to pull to the side and go to shoot my dad, put him on a tube. But as soon as I got in, I just called the doctor and said, "Better to go in the rescue." But do they still do that today?
They do. The EMTs. I mean, the premise, if you're calling 911, the premise is you're calling them because somebody needs emergency treatment. And once they show up, They are legally obligated to do what they're there to do. So yeah, they are. They are. However, you can always, once you get to the hospital, anything that's been done can generally be undone.
That was one of the things.
So,
yeah.
Doctor, my question to you is, what do you do as a survivor? I've survived 2 heart attacks. I've survived prostate cancer, Kaposi sarcoma, form of skin cancer. So do I just chalk it up in the wind if the cancer comes back? Oh well, I beat it the last time. I guess it's my time to go out.
well, again, that's kind of that's a little bit of a personal decision between you and your doc, because, we usually can make some educated guesses about what someone's prognosis is and whether, this can be easily treated or not. And so you may, it's great that you have survived all of those things and you look pretty darn good for it. But eventually, we're all going to have something, as my grandmother says, we all got to get something that you aren't going to get past. And I would charge you to talk with whoever your doctor is, whoever's taking care of you when you get whatever the next thing is that comes along, and say, okay, so what are my odds here? I beat this, I beat that. Well, what does the future with this thing I have, what's it look like? And pay attention to the percentages. We're really great at throwing out percentages, and we'll say, 75% of people who have this, X will happen. So if they say, 75% of people who have this are alive at 5 years, that also means that there are 25% of people who are not. So while, we all want to glom onto the good part, if it's like, well, we can give you this treatment and 40% of the people who took this in 5 years, they were fine, that's great. But what happened to those other 60%? So that's kind of the question that you want to ask. You don't want to clue in and say, oh, wow, I'm going to be fine because the doctor told me 20% of people are alive in 5 years. You need to stop a minute and go, well, what happened to the other bunch? And that helps you form the decision. Do you want to call it quits now? Or do you think you're going to be able to, kick this to the curb like you did everything else? Yes?
I just wanted to say that recently there was, I think within the last year, there was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine where the conversation basically had to do with the fact that probabilities were not a great way to communicate to patients what was going on, that it was much better, and you can do this, if you asked for scenarios. The most likely scenario, the best case, and the worst case. And have them tell you a story, because we can get really messed up with probabilities. Most people are not good at it. There was a Nobel Prize awarded to a couple of psychologists, one psychologist, the other one had passed, where they basically concluded that human beings are absolutely terrible at making decisions when it has to do with probability. And they proved it. And one very simple example was a study where they spun like a wheel of fortune, and then they asked each subject in the study how many countries there were in Africa. And people chose a number that was closer to the number that showed up in the Wheel of Fortune. So yeah, that's just one example. But I just wanted to kind of chime in on the importance of finding a way to get a communication that you can really make sense of.
Okay.
I have a question actually for both, because I think, again, there are a lot of wonderful physicians who will suggest hospice when they should suggest hospice, but there are others who will, as we talked about, go on and on and on. So the question actually is for both. Do you have to specifically say things in advance directives of when you might want hospice? And suppose you're in a situation as the clock, there's a family member who has the power of attorney. Do you have, I think, is that part of your responsibility to bring up to the healthcare community or whoever is taking care of us that I would like to consider hospice? Because a lot of times, to the medical community, when you consider hospice, it's failure and it's, giving up and so forth. Right.
It absolutely, you or your proxy is kind of in charge of what's going on, I'd like to say. So you can absolutely bring it up at any time and just say, I want to talk about this. Whether you specify it out in what your wishes are, I think it sort of is inherent in there when you list or when you say, if I'm in this condition, I only want these kinds of services, or I don't want these kinds of services. If as treatment is going on, you kind of need to constantly reevaluate exactly what's going on, how well is it working, how are you feeling, what are your symptoms like, and do you really feel like going on with anything anymore? Like I said, you can always change your mind and stop, and I would like to think that physicians will respect that. You got anything?
I don't know that I have anything to add other than I think certainly at the very least you should communicate with your proxy about whether you would want hospice as a part of your end-of-life experience. And I just want to give you a couple of very short examples. I'm a hospice worker as well. And one of the things I did as a volunteer was I photographed a wedding in the ICU at HUP. And the gentleman was too ill to go to the hospice at 17th and Lombard. So they had the wedding right there, and I was able to take pictures. I was so honored to do that. The same hospice, and there's actually a very interesting article in what I've given you called The Best Possible Day, written by Atul Gawande, which you can read, but online by looking at it. But there was a person in the Lombard Hospice who said, one of the things I always wanted to do was to go on one last camping trip with my kids, and I can't do that now. Well, hospice got a tent, and they put it up in the hospice unit in the children's waiting room, and the kids stayed overnight with him in the tent in the hospice unit. So, I mean, hospice can really listen to you and try to give you terrific last experiences. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a great program.
I haven't gotten to your question yet, which was about how you even arrange for it. Hospice it's paid for by Medicare, so that anyone with Medicare has that as one of their benefits. Not so sure, I'm pretty sure that there are some commercial plans that will pay for it as well. There are a number of hospice agencies throughout the city that have different jurisdictions, and you can talk with your doctors about which ones they use, that they're familiar with utilizing, and it's a matter of having your doc gives them a call and says, listen, Joe Smith is interested in your services, go meet with him. And they come out and they'll sit and they'll talk to you about some of the things that they do, about the services that are available. One of the best things that I didn't even touch on about hospice services is that after whoever who is getting their services passes away, there's a year of bereavement service for the family that comes afterwards, so that sometimes it's group counseling or grief counseling that goes along with it to help them deal with the fact that they just lost their loved one. I'll get it, new teeth. And that's one of the best things. There are social workers that are involved with them. There are chaplains and various spiritual persons who can come out and assist you and the family. It's not just, and that's the other beauty of hospice, is it's not just for the person who's ill. It's also support and encouragement and education and for the family. That's whatever encompasses the family, whether they're actual family, or it's friends, or whoever it is that's around the person that's ill. They support them tremendously.
Just one other thing, and I don't want to disparage any particular hospice organization, but in my reading and experience, it's been recommended that you look for a not-for-profit hospice. There's something fundamentally different about a for-profit hospice from a not-for-profit home. So, just wanted to add that.
Question about if you're looking for a lawyer to sort of solidify your advance notice, is it better? There's some elder care lawyers who only specialize in elder care, or can any regular versus just going to a regular lawyer?
I think personally it's better to get an elder care person because they're going to be more attentive to and more aware of the various kinds of things. But in terms of the actual advanced medical directive, I think any lawyer can review it and say whether they think it's helpful for you, the way it's done. But I would choose an elder care lawyer.
Yes.
We had our advanced care done 20 years ago, in the wills. Has there been that much changes that we should probably revisit this? In the changes of living wills and advanced care and all that?
It's always a good idea to revisit it, not necessarily because there may have been changes in the legal community, but there may be changes in what your wishes are.
Or your health.
Or your health, for that matter. So you say they've been in existence for 20 years. It's worth a good, just a little look-see to see if there's anything that you would change, that you want to change. Yeah.
I would encourage you to do that, especially just in terms of seeing if there's enough detail to satisfy you.
Yeah.
Does hospice help with funeral services?
They do not. They do not. Yes, sir.
Go back to the initial point about for-profit and non-profit. Are you kind of suggesting that there may be more abuses at for-profit hospices as opposed to the outright? Is that what you're trying to get at?
I was, and it was based on some comments made by people who work for hospice. And if you think about it fundamentally, if you have a for-profit hospital, every decision has that little notation associated to it, whereas a not-for-profit isn't thinking about that. So I believe me, I do not want to bag a for-profit hospice, but I think it's worth your looking at that issue when you look for a hospice.
I just like to say, as a retired medical person working in the field, we can't be also putting people in hospice and saying, okay, they're taken care of. If you have a mother, a brother, a sister, you need to check on that person and see that they're getting the proper care. It's not just totally, the hospice, they're in the hospice, they're fine. A lot of these places are understaffed. A lot of them, the people aren't getting the salaries that they deserve. And they're expected to take care of your loved ones and you. So you need to be on top of it.
I would say that goes for just about anything, whether it's hospice or someone's in a nursing facility or they're in a rehab facility or they're even in the hospital. No one's going to be as attentive to your loved one as you are. And yeah, they're supposed to be taking care of them, and they will. But sometimes there are competing demands, and it's always best to have a second pair of eyes, a second pair of ears, just kind of glancing around, checking out what's going on. I mean, after all, they're the sick person. They can't necessarily keep an eye on what the nurses and the aides and everybody's doing. They're trying to get better from whatever it is that ails them. So So that would qualify for just about anything. Mhm. Yes.
Due to your question, if you're on Medicare and you go to a hospice, do you get to choose the hospice you go to, or do they choose it for you?
You can choose. You get to choose. Usually, these are decisions that are made either when you're in a hospital or if you're in a physician's office. Because
Presents you the options.
There's a social worker that will have options to pick from. If you're in a physician's office, then they usually have a social worker associated with them, and they will come and say, okay, these are the hospices that we generally work with. And this is this kind, this is whatever. They can give you brochures to review. You can always look them up. Everything's on the internet. You can either look them up, or you can even go visit their inpatient units if you wish. As you're making your decision. Yes.
I was going to say you can also call Medicare and ask them about what they heard about places.
Yeah, and on there's CMS.gov, which is the Medicare website. You can probably find, because they rate everything. They rate hospitals, they rate hospices, they rate doctors. So you can go to that website and look around, and they can tell you, are they a 5-star, are they a 2-star, that kind of thing. Yes, sir.
Well, a situation that I'm in, I have a family members who I would like to be my healthcare agent. The problem is very remote. They don't know anything about Philadelphia. It doesn't seem here. I have a friend here who's very knowledgeable about that, but I would like my family to have the ultimate authority. Anyway,
You could specify that?
Yeah, family members as the first and second choice, but to say that there's an advocate.
Absolutely. Or you can even say that you want them to work together. You can specify that you want the friend who knows the landscape work with such and such a family member, so that they jointly will make decisions.
And I would add to that if you want to do that kind of a thing, it would be really important for your family members to come together with the person you are designating that's local to help make choices, because if you're all on the same page, it's going to be a much better scene than if your family members have different ideas about what should happen to you. And it's rough on the person who does accept the job of a proxy and then gets contradicted by
somebody else.
Otherone else.
Yeah. And it's the most important thing, besides all of this that we've been talking about, the most important thing is that your family, your friends, your physician all know what it is you want. You don't want to make these kinds of decisions in a vacuum and say, oh, well, she knows me, she knows what I want, I don't have to tell her. Yeah, you do. Because
have the conversation.
Have the conversation, no matter how uncomfortable and painful it may be. Have the conversation. You may have to have it more than once, you may have to have it more than twice, but in the long run, you're better off having it and making sure everybody is aware, and you've got it written down, and where they can find it when they need it. Much better situation.
There's a question up there.
I just wanted to piggyback on, I think the gentleman over here was mentioning, does hospice help you in the end with going to funeral parlor and whatnot? Some will, if they're really good, because I was in the hospital when my partner passed away right next door in the nursing home. I could kill her, but anyway, they actually came in to tell me that she had passed away in the night, and asked me, do I need help with making the phone calls to have her body picked up? I was like, oh God, please, I have the number of my phone, so please call them. And they stayed with me so that I could communicate, yes, I'm here, but the chaplain is going to speak on my behalf. I don't know anything. Like, I didn't know the address, I just...
Great.
But they will help if you need it.
Yeah. When you asked that question, I thought you meant, were they going to help with the funeral services? But no, just interpret. And this is why we have to talk.
thanks to both Mark Peterson and to Karen Nichols. Give them another round of applause. As we know, these are obviously tough conversations to be a part of, but we offer our sincere thanks to both of them for leading everyone here through the discussion here today, as well as to all of you for being here and taking part.